let's begin this way. You recently praised San Francisco Mayor Ed Lee for stopping a plan to implement stop and frisk. In your letter to Mayor Lee, you called the practice nothing more than government racial profiling. But as you know, there are many in the law enforcement community, and many New Yorkers for that matter, that say stop and frisk is an excellent and effective police practice.
I had heard that Mayor Lee was very concerned about the spike in crime in his city, and he was considering new strategies, and one of the strategies he was considering was New York's style of stop and frisk. I wrote him and told him that I really felt it was a bad idea. It did not have great results for the city of New York. Let's see stop and frisk for what it really is. You've got close to 700,000 people last year alone being stopped and frisked, almost all of whom have done nothing wrong, and almost all of whom are people of color. It's undeniable that it is a form of racial profiling, and I don't believe that racial profiling has any place anywhere in New York City or in other cities, whether it be in the police department or other. And in fact, if you look at the spate of violent crimes and shootings alone in the last few weeks, that's almost proof right there that even with all this increased stop and frisk, that there has not been a real reduction in the number of murders, a real reduction in the number of guns being on the streets. The mayor and the police commissioner often cite the lower numbers of murders. Well, actually, the numbers of murders have not gone down significantly in these past 10 years. In 2012, there were something like 585 murders in New York City. It's gone down to something like 515, about a 10 to 12% decrease. Meanwhile, stop and frisks have gone up from less than 100,000. I think it was 97,000 in 2002 to now nearly 700,000. And the correlation is really not there. Meanwhile, there are so many people being humiliated with this stop and frisk for no reason whatsoever in the vast majority of the cases.
Well, Mr.
So
Lou, is it
I had to
possible
report to Mayor Lee what was going on?
Understandable, but is it possible to have a balance here? For example, somewhere in the middle, would you actually stop the practice of stop and frisk if you were elected mayor of New York City?
Nice question, Dominic. Stop and frisk, let's be very clear, this is not the only thing that the police can do to keep people safe. There are other strategies that have been proven in Boston, in Chicago, and Atlanta, where the police, for example, undertake a form of focused deterrence, which recognizes that in every community, people generally know who the bad guys are. And the police should concentrate their efforts in keeping an eye, keeping tabs on the bad people and making sure that they are being kept in control, as opposed to assuming everybody is potentially bad and then stopping so many people, almost all of whom have really done nothing wrong. So stop it. It's not a question of should we have stop and frisk so that people can be safe or not. The question is, what can the police do better to protect people, to keep people from being killed, and to get guns off the street? And it's high time that New York City look at what other cities have been doing that is effective in reducing crime and getting guns off the street. I had asked Mayor Lee to take a look at the results here. The results are spotty, and not only that, but they have resulted in some greater financial risk to the city's taxpayers. So all of these issues warrant further examination. And I'm happy that Mayor Lee ultimately decided against having stop and frisk in the city of San Francisco. I think his words were that he did not want any kind of policies that had the potential of racial profiling. And I wish that our mayor here in New York City would adopt that kind of approach also.
How would you, Mr. Controller, assess the overall performance of Police Commissioner Ray Kelly? You already know that his approval numbers have consistently remained sky high.
Dominic, I don't look at the approval numbers all that much. I think Ray Kelly has been a tremendously committed public servant. He's been commissioner, I believe, longer than anybody else in New York City has been. He's committed to the safety of everybody in this city. But you know, look, at some point, I think any position should always have some new blood at some point. And beginning in 2014, I believe there will be new blood in all different positions in the city of New York.
Do you think Controller John Liu, that Police Commissioner Ray Kelly could run for mayor?
I think he's certainly been talked about as a candidate. I believe he must have thought about it at some point. And the election is still a little more than a year off, and I'm sure Commissioner Kelly will make up his own mind.
Well, just for a minute here, and this is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, City Controller John Liu, what are you going to do? Are you running for mayor? And you already know that some of your critics will charge that you don't have the credibility to do so.
Well, number one, I'm not 800 pounds, Dominic, at least not yet. The election, every day I meet people who come up to me in all different boroughs, in all different situations, and they literally say to me, you got to run, don't let us down. So I take those comments very seriously, and I love the job as controller. Next year's elections will be tremendous opportunities for not just people or candidates looking to run for office, but I think for the city of New York, the people of New York City, to demand change. I think change is needed, and I'm certainly going to consider all my options.
When do you make a decision, and are you worried about the ethical cloud, if you will, that hovers over you, and that, you know, some of your potential rivals in the race will point to some of the troubles that your office has had?
There's no question that there will be a lot of politics. It will be very political. But I am very proud of the work that we've done in the Comptroller's office in the last 2.5 years or so that I've been in office. I'm also very proud of the campaign that I've run in the past and currently with my campaign fundraising practices. Sure, there are allegations and innuendos, nothing proven, and I hope that whoever is investigating will do their job quickly so that we can clear the air. But at the end of the day, Dominic, I'm very proud of both my campaign and the work that we've done in the Comptroller's office and that we'll continue to do.
And full disclosure, I covered you when you were part of the city council and covered your race for city controller and thus going forward. Are you worried about a potential...
You sure did.
That I did. Are you worried about this ethical cloud? I mean, there are so many allegations in it, but are you worried about this?
There are so many allegations and innuendo, none proven. I'm very proud of my record, and I'll gladly compare my record to anybody else's.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Traditionally, mayors and controllers, especially of opposite political parties, they don't get along. For example, a Republican mayor and a Democratic controller. Hint, hint. But what's going on here with the bad blood between Mayor Bloomberg and yourself?
Look, I don't think any of this is personal. It's just, I think I have a very different viewpoint about the city of New York and how things should be run. And we happen to disagree on many of these issues. There are some things that I agree with him on. For example, I think his strong stance on immigration policy is the right approach, and I agree with him that our presidential candidates in this year's election should take on that issue head on. But there are other things that, it happens to be a lot of things that we disagree upon. I'm the city controller elected, as you know, in 2009 by the people of New York City to be an independent watchdog, the fiscal officer of the city of New York. And I don't go out of my way to upset people, but just because my positions or the work that I do as controller may upset some people, including the mayor of New York City, that can't dissuade me or allow me to be distracted from the work that I have to do for the people.
Fair enough, Mr. Liu, Controller Liu, but the mayor has basically called you a hypocrite. Apparently, you complained about this Vector Telecom, a company that owes the city money, but the mayor points out that your own campaign is refusing to pay back fines to the tunes of, I believe, $500,000.
There's no question that the mayor will continue to lob stuff at me in the coming year. I don't think he'll be supporting me for anything. But the reality is this, Dominic. My office is looking very carefully and closely at all city contracts, and whether a company owes $80,000 to the people of New York City, or $500 million, as in the case of City Time, or $163 million, as is the case with HP and the 911 call system upgrade, we are always going to do our due diligence and insist that companies who want to do business with the city of New York repay what they owe the taxpayers. As far as the fines that the mayor is complaining about that I have not paid, yes, I have a lot of fines that the mayor has gone after me on hanging posters during the 2009 elections. Now, the first set of fines, we went through the process, and they were all dismissed. The current set of fines are tickets that were issued to my campaign more than 2 years after the 2009 elections. This has never been done before. I believe there's some kind of vendetta going on, but nonetheless, my campaign is entitled to go through the due process, and we certainly will use our due process. If at the end of this due process I am found liable, I will make good on my obligations. But at the same time, right now, we are entitled to our due process in a in a proceeding that I do believe is unfair.
You know what some of the critics say, why not just pay the fines?
It wouldn't be that hard to pay the fines, Dominic, but this is a matter of principle for me. I don't think that this should have gotten this far, especially when the summonses were dismissed already, and that this has never been done, to issue tickets more than 2 years after the alleged violations.
City Controller Liu, I only have about a minute and a half left here, but you mentioned a potential vendetta against you. Are you saying that Mayor Bloomberg, the mayor of the great city of New York, is out to get you?
I'm saying that this has been an unfair proceeding, and things will come out over the next several months.
Fair enough. If you should run for mayor, how do you get around the front runners in this race, Bill Thompson and Christine Quinn? And some will argue they'll have a field day with the reported investigations into your campaign.
I'm sure people will have a field day. Like I said earlier before, it's very political. But I also know that there are lots of people who are behind me, who are encouraging me, and I am not going to let them down.
Fair enough. City Controller Liu, we really do appreciate the time that you made for us today. I want to ask you this, and concluding, and then maybe one quick follow-up on stop and frisk. But a blast from the past, former police commissioner Bill Bratton, who also headed the police force, as you well know, in Los Angeles, has met with a number of candidates for mayor, including Bill Thompson. If you're elected, would you consider bringing Bratton back as police commissioner of New York City?
Dominic, these two names have been mentioned quite a bit. These two, one current and one former police commissioner. In a city of 8.5 million people, with a police force that is very sizable and so important to the success and the future of our city, I think that there is a great deal of talent out there, new blood, that could energize and infuse New York's finest with the very best of leadership as well. So I think the discussion seems to be extremely limited so far.
Okay, fair enough. I conclude this way, and again, we really do appreciate the time. Are you willing to admit, Controller Liu, that stop and frisk, that there may be some good aspects to this, that perhaps stop and frisk has saved the lives of some of these young people, some of these young children that we hear about all the time, victims of stray bullets. Are you willing to concede anything in terms of stop and frisk being a good policy?
You ask about the possibility that it may have saved lives. The possibility is there. There's also the possibility that the rift that this practice has created between many communities in New York City and the police department have made it more difficult for the police to keep communities safe and may have endangered people as well. So both possibilities are the same. But if you look at the numbers themselves, the correlation between the reductions in the numbers of murders and the guns taken off the streets versus the reduction versus the increase in the numbers of stop and frisk, I don't see the numerical correlation to be there, even though the mayor and the commissioner often cite these statistics as justifications for stop and frisk. What I'm saying is that stop and frisk is not the only thing that the police can do. There are many other strategies that they should be looking at and employing in the city of New York to really make our neighborhoods safe.
City Controller John Liu, it's so nice to see you tonight. Thank you so much for the time.
It's been a pleasure, Dominic.